Welcome to the Mold Matters podcast. Whether you are looking for help recovering from mold illness or just want to learn more about creating a safe environment for your family, this podcast is the place for you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mold Matters podcast. Joining you from Layton, Utah. My name is Jeremy Evans, the host, alongside with my friend
Mike Adams
and
Hi
colleague
there.
and fellow colleague in the mold remediation and testing business. We've provided or prepared a podcast for everyone today on a topic. It seems like every time after these podcasts, I feel like, man, we've covered so much. What else is there? But then there's endless topics that relate to mold and how it can affect our lives.
And that's really one of the reasons why it's so hard to figure out, is there are so many variables with houses and people and treatments and it's crazy. Yeah,
and the more the last couple of weeks I've dived into mycotoxin testing a little more heavily and realized how woefully insufficient that is, and even the greatest scientists haven't really figured out a great way to do that. So there's
but you have stumbled onto a test that will identify if they have a dog or not.
Yeah.
Which is good. It's good information.
Yeah. We tried out a new company that does testing, and they test for a lot of items, and not just not just mold and mycotoxins. But the test came back with pretty much nothing other than they told me there was a mouse or more than one and a dog.
I think we could have asked them if they have a dog and got the same information.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
So, anyways, mold testing is definitely
a trial,
and it's got a long ways to go. So, but today we're going to talk about a topic we've hinted at, ventilation. We've mentioned little things about, crawl spaces, attics, and bathrooms as far as ventilation goes. But I thought we'd do a little deeper dive here today into ventilation of homes, because it really does play such a big role in humidity and in moisture levels in home, which obviously equates to mold.
Right.
So you and I kind of had this discussion, Mike. Let's kind of as a introduction to ventilation. Why does ventilation? I mean, it kind of makes sense, but why does ventilation really help? How does it help moisture levels?
Well, it is. It's kind of a complicated subject.
Seems simple, but it's a little more complex.
It's a little bit more complex. But basically, any kind of air movement is going to, if I understand this correctly, any kind of air movement is going to displace humid air and potentially bring in drier air. So in other words, let's take for an example a window sill that has condensation in it.
Mm-hmm.
If you have air movement above that window sill, before you have air movement, that air immediately above that window sill track is full of water vapor, because that water is trying to evaporate out of there, albeit very slowly, because the air above that windowsill is full of water vapor.
So the most humid part of a space is the area right above the water.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And so if you can move that water vapor away from that area and bring in essentially drier air,
mm-hmm.
now that moisture in that window track can evaporate more easily or more readily,
mm-hmm.
and you can speed up the drying process. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So essentially, the ventilation or the air movement clears the way so that the water can evaporate more.
Yeah.
It's almost like when it has that thick water vapor above the water, it can't. It's almost inhibiting it from releasing. And
it's a little bit like just we talk about groundwater getting saturated.
Mm-hmm.
And once it's saturated, that moisture needs to move into a dry area.
Yeah.
Wet wants to go to dry.
Yeah.
I think the same is true with the air.
Mm-hmm.
Wetter areas want to move into the drier parts of the air.
Yeah.
So we all know that if you put a fan on something, it's going to dry it out quicker, or it's going to keep water from accumulating there.
Yeah.
But the real physics of why is kind of complicated.
Yeah. So it's really important in any home to have, and maybe we should distinguish air movement versus ventilation. I mean, they're both important, but how would you distinguish those?
Just ventilation is the exchange of indoor and outdoor air, in my mind.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And then air movement, maybe not as good because you're not bringing in fresh air, but still creating that effect that you're describing.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the traditional water mitigation protocols, when you have a flood or a big leak of some sort, I mean, they're bringing in big industrial fans.
Yeah.
To create that.
I'll give you a perfect example of what we're talking about is I've noticed over the years, third floor of an apartment complex, third floor or higher, will have much more of a mold load than the first and second floor, always. And it's because the heat rises. And so once you get to the third floor, those guys don't have to run their furnace nearly as much as the people on the first and second floor.
Yeah.
So they don't have nearly the air movement, which means they have more condensation, which means they have more mold.
Oh, I never put that.
Yeah.
I've heard you mention this concept of the top floor having the worst problem, but I didn't realize it was that.
It's just a lack of air movement.
Lack of air movement.
Because they're getting their heat essentially from the first and second floor.
Yeah, without doing anything. Interesting. Right. Interesting. So, what is the typical, I guess, what's the typical relative humidity, if that's what we're going to use to measure for an indoor space? What are we shooting for?
Well, I think we're shooting for is within reason, but as dry as possible.
Yeah.
If you're worried about mold, I know a lot of people feel like I have to have some moisture in the air, or I get shocked when I turn on the lights switches or whatever. That getting shocked from electrical appliances has been shown in different studies to be directly related to your mold load. And so if you can get rid of your mold load in your home, the shocks will go away, and you won't have to have that extra humidity to stop the shocking.
Yeah.
So as far as a level, you really want to keep your home below 50% humidity.
Yeah. That's kind of the one I stand by too. We were just, we've met different people. I mean, I've heard in the South, it's so hard to keep things dry that I think a lot of remediators out there kind of say 60's okay.
60's good. Yeah, 60's great. Yeah.
60's, that's livable. In these dry, I've heard as low as 40 too, 40, 45, 50. So I think the drier the better if you can.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're shooting for. The biggest culprits of elevated, humidity levels or moisture levels are kind of like I mentioned in the beginning, attics, crawl spaces, and bathrooms. Let's run by each of those real quick. So attics, what's the dynamic in the attic, and how do we ventilate for that?
So the idea with an attic is you want to have incoming air, usually going through the eaves, or I think they call it the soffit. And then you have vents above that level, 3 feet or higher, and that's the exhaust air going out. So you have that natural air movement of coming in the eaves, going up and out. Some attics have what they call a ridge cap vent.
Yeah.
I think that's what
ridge
they call
venting.
It.
The ridge cap, goes over.
Where when the guys put the roof on, they leave an intentional gap at the very top, and then they put a ridge over that, and so you're exhausting hot air along that entire ridge of the roof. Other vents are like turtleback vents, which is what we have in our house, and they just I want to say every 8 feet or so along the top line, we've got these little turtleback vents.
They look kind of like turtlebacks as well.
Yeah. So I think we wrote down.
Then there's gable vents on the the side. Typically on the side of the house below the peak of the roofs. Right. They'll put those. You've probably seen the octagonal or sometimes circular vents they'll put in there. I think those are the most common ones. Yeah. Back in the day, we talked about they used to have powered fans they'd stick in your attic.
A lot of homes in the 60s had those.
Yeah, I think we realized those aren't the best, and so we've gone to more of, I think they call it passive ventilation, but basically you create openings in various spots in the attic, and then it creates a suction effect and a cross breeze effect, and then it does what you kind of described in the beginning. That air flowing over the surfaces keeps the water evaporating off of there and doesn't allow it to kind of sit and accumulate and create a mold scenario or water mold scenario. Because attics and crawl spaces, those are the two spots where you don't have your HVAC ducting connected to, right? So there's not.
It's not conditioned. It's
not conditioned, and it's not. There's no air movement, and there's no. Like we've talked before in podcasts, those air conditioning units often suck out the moisture too before they pump it back into the house. So attics, crawl spaces, they're really at a disadvantage from that perspective. They get hot, stagnant air. So this ventilation in the attic is to create, that cross breeze. And
now I've said this for years, and I still stand by it. I have yet to see an attic make somebody sick.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I don't think I've ever seen it. Now, crawl spaces, on the other hand, absolutely. They will. Contaminated crawl space will definitely make people sick in the home.
Talk about that. I know we've mentioned it, but what's the difference there?
Well, I think the attic naturally wants to vent because hot air rises, wants to vent up and out.
Yeah.
And so don't have any. There's no physics to bring that air down into that living space. Mm-hmm. Whereas with a crawl space, you've got all kinds of openings. Sometimes you even have your HVAC furnace in the crawl space.
Yeah.
And we know those are not airtight. And so you're bringing all kinds of if that crawl space is moldy or toxic for whatever reason, you are bringing that air into your living space.
Yeah. In fact, we read from a professional recently where he talked about, if you think about all the piping that goes through your crawl space too, it's not like an attic where, if you put a pipe in the attic, some kind of ventilation or piping, they'll tar it and seal it up real good. In the crawl space, if they're doing some kind of piping and coming up into the house,
there's all kinds of openings.
There's tons of openings.
Yeah.
They're not worried about water coming in like they are on an attic roof. Yeah. They're just. So there's all kinds of openings that way. And then even, if you look really closely at the HVAC units themselves, or if you've ever dissected those even mildly, they aren't designed to be these airtight machines that don't let air in. And
some of them are actually by design. You just slide the filter in.
Yeah.
And there's really no cover over that.
Yeah.
That opening where the filter goes in. So they're a long way from airtight systems.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of transitioning to crawl spaces. And we've mentioned this before, but you get a humid scenario down there that leads to a mold scenario down there. And that can cause real problems in the rest of your house, just from the HVAC alone, not to mention some of these holes that go up into the house.
Right. I've seen a lot of really, really sick houses that the problem originated in the crawl space.
Yeah. Let's talk about the ventilation of a crawl space. I mean, it's dynamically a little bit different than an attic, but tell us about that.
So the most code, I think, throughout the country is 1 square foot for every 500 square feet of crawl space, which really isn't very much.
Yeah.
So whatever your footprint is of your crawl space, say it's 1,500 square feet.
Yeah.
Which would be a nice size rambler home.
Yeah.
You have a 1,500 square foot crawl space, then you would want 3 square feet of ventilation, which is not very much at all.
Yeah. And I mean, and you want at least, I've read different things, but you don't want to just put one vent, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The idea is to get cross ventilation.
Cross ventilation. Yeah.
But I do need to throw this out is that, and I've said this for years, we have to be really, really careful because every climate is so different.
Yeah.
That it will never be a one-size-fits-all for a crawl space.
Yeah.
I've seen the companies that want to encapsulate everything. I've seen companies that want to just go in and put a vapor barrier down. I've also seen people who are saying, no, just get a sump pump in there and a dehumidifier and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
There's a million different theories, and I think the reason for that is everybody's climate is a little bit different. And so you can't, there's not a silver bullet for a crawl space.
Yeah. So so you said approximately 1 square foot per 500 square feet, but that's quite variable is what you're saying. It kind of depends.
Yeah.
I've read it can be lower, it can be higher.
Yeah, it even depends on, like, there's exceptions to that code. As an example, if you have a vapor barrier down, you need even less ventilation, which it doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but that's how it reads.
But that's how the code reads, yeah. So you want at least 2. I mean, I think everyone has their own opinions. At least, and we'll transition into humid areas here right now, but in Utah, where we're dry, I think the more the merrier. I mean,
I agree.
I'm sure,
I absolutely agree.
Sure, there's a max, but if you can get multiple in there and create much more flow, that's great.
Yeah.
Now, when we think of some of these humid environments in the South where it's commonly 80-90% relative humidity, you put tons of vents in your crawl space, and you're basically inviting in really humid air to flush out really humid air.
Yeah.
So it is a little bit different. Do you have any solutions you could offer with those humid environments?
I have not ever lived down there in the South where it's really humid, or even up in the Northwest. But I will say this: I firmly believe fresh air is always our friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you're going to err, you should err on the side of more ventilation than less.
Yeah.
Once you start reducing the ventilation and in effect try to keep the humidity out, you're the example we used the other day was you start your lawnmower out in the front lawn and mow the lawn. You don't think anything of the toxins that are coming off that lawnmower. Now you put that lawnmower in a crawl space with very, very few vents.
Yeah.
And start it up. That becomes a toxic crawl space in a hurry.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing applies with like a microbial load down there. If you don't have very many vents, that can become toxic a lot quicker than if you have a number of vents to bring in more fresh air.
Yeah. So still do some venting in a humid area. We have many colleagues in the humid areas, and I agree with this concept of possibly looking into dehumidification down there.
Yeah.
So have some fresh air, but perhaps install a dehumidifier that can keep the relative humidity
and
down.
Also if you've got we have a licensee in Australia now. They call it rising damp. Basically, it's just your groundwater is your water table is really high.
Yeah, water table, yeah.
So if you've got a really high water table, you may need to look at some kind of a sump pump or a French drain type deal to get that dried out.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever going to work to have a sopping wet crawl space and just put a vapor barrier over the top of that. That's a disaster, a recipe for a disaster for me. Yeah,
I've heard you speak of vapor barriers before. I know you're not a big fan.
Yeah. And again, that's in Utah. I'm not a big fan.
Yeah.
I may be a big fan if I lived somewhere else and saw that environment more.
Yeah.
But once you eliminate fresh air flow to anything, you're inviting microbial growth.
Yeah. Yeah. So dehumidifiers, not a bad option. I know they're semi-expensive, but I've even seen a lot of them. I think what's cool on them, they have a little gauge. So if the humidity gets above, say your threshold is 50 or 55 or whatever in the crawl space, when it rises above that, it kicks on, brings it down, and then, doesn't turn on until it gets to that threshold again. So I think those are kind of nice. You can also get those in your attics, if that's a real problem. And it's less common, but some attics even have the HVAC units in them. Yeah. I don't see it a lot in Utah. I wonder if it's...
ours is actually... Well, we have 2 furnaces. We have one furnace in the basement and one in the attic.
And one in the attic?
Yeah. I don't like it.
And not a big fan. Yeah, I'm not either. So not a bad idea to dehumidify up there. So anything else on crawl spaces to keep in mind?
No, I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered it. I do think that if you have a mold load problem, the first place I would look is a crawl space. Because you can even remediate the house, but if you don't take care of the crawl space, that house is going to be still be sick.
You know, when I go in to do a mold inspection in a home, and they have a crawl space, I feel like I almost know there's going to be mold in there, especially if the home's, you know, a certain age. Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
I've said this for years. If you show me a crawl space, I'll show you mold. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, with our company, we have a process where we can disinfect that entire crawl space and then put a residual protection down. It gives you a real fighting chance of never having mold again. Yeah. But if you don't do something about it, it's really, really hard to not have mold in your crawl space.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. So crawl spaces are tricky. And then let's go inside a little bit with the bathrooms. We've talked about these before, but talk about the ventilation there and what it looks like.
Well, this is my spiel on, on bathroom fans. Is they're kind of a two-edged sword, because you want the fan to run while you're taking a shower to kind of dispel some of the moisture out of the bathroom. Mm-hmm. But I also think you can get a mold load within that fan and the plastic ductwork that heads out. It may not be that big of a deal, but they can grow mold inside there. The other thing I caution people about fans is you need to keep a really good eye on your drains in your bathrooms, and make sure that your drains are really just pristine clean. Mm-hmm. Because if you build up any kind of a mold load or bacteria load in your drains, and then you turn your fan on, now all of a sudden you're pulling the toxins out of your drain into your bathroom space. Yeah.
So probably the best prevention there is, like you said, keep the drains really clean. Right. And then you don't have to worry about turning the fan on. Yeah. And you're saying, so that fan, I mean, it's sucking the moisture out. So undoubtedly that fan mechanism and the ducting gets really moist. I mean, that's where it goes. And it does vent outside, but.
Some do. Some builders got real lazy and just vented it into the attic, which they'll call us in a while and we'll fix it for them.
Is there anything you can do to rectify the ducting and the vent that gets moist and moldy? Besides kind of a process where we fumigate it essentially or fog it?
Fog it and then leave a residual protection down. Yeah. That makes everything essentially antimicrobial up in there. Yeah. I don't know any other way to fix that.
Yeah. So. Do you suggest opening windows or doors as well, just during the shower time?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And maybe 15 minutes afterwards.
Yeah. Which I don't do, by the way, because I don't like to be cold when I shower, but I should.
Well, I think anything you can do, to keep the air flowing through there is a great idea. Yeah. In fact, I go into. If I go into a home that was built in the 50s, which I know it doesn't have any bathroom fans, unless they installed them later, which rarely is the case in my experience. If someone calls me for a mold concern or they're feeling symptoms that they think are mold-like, it's a 50s, 60s home, maybe even 70s. If I go into the bathroom, see no bathroom fan, unless they clean it really well, 90% of the time I can look at the ceiling and I'll see teeny little spots.
Yeah, there'll be mold on the
ceiling. They're like, is that mold? And I'm like, yes, that's mold guaranteed. And some bacteria, I'm sure. But bathrooms they're a tricky thing because it's just this thin film of moisture that gets on the surfaces and you don't think much of it. Right. But 10, 20, 30 years of that, it starts to, mold starts to grow and it's very, it's not going to be this big black patch that you sometimes see with floods and leaks, but you'll see a little film of brown and orange and yellow.
And sometimes it's even kind of a cool pattern. Yeah. That it's formed on the ceiling. And this is the question I've always asked myself is that pattern formed because the steam takes the mold spore up with it? Mm-hmm. Or does the steam form a moisture pattern and then the mold spore finds it? I don't know that we'll ever find the answer to that.
Yeah,
you never know. But
the chicken before the egg.
Yeah, it is. That's what happens when you do this for a long time. You start thinking about
stuff like
things
that.
like that. Yeah,
the questions you think about. Is it a good idea if you don't have a bathroom fan to pay to have one installed?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I've heard different things, but I think you can find someone who can do it for relatively cheap.
Yeah, just make sure they don't bend it into the attic.
Yeah, you're just moving the moisture into another area. So, I think that's pretty good on bathrooms. You know, as far as the rest of the home, we kind of talked about, hopefully your HVAC unit is a good one that does a lot of the conditioning of the air and circulating of air.
Right.
Is there anything else on the indoor environment that can facilitate?
Just be real careful with, I know some people recommend that you set your thermostat to where your fan is always running. I'm not a huge fan of that just because it's obnoxious.
You're a huge fan of the fan?
I'm not a huge fan of the constant fan.
Okay.
I'm a moderate fan of a moderate usage of a fan. And the reason they want to run that fan constantly is because you can keep your air conditioning coils nice and dried out.
Yeah.
Because once your air conditioner stops, once the thermostat says, okay, the house is cool enough, go ahead and turn everything off, those coils are going to condense like crazy.
Yeah, that's true.
With the lack of air movement.
Yeah.
So it's something to consider.
Yeah.
Just keeping some air movement over those coils constantly.
Yeah.
To keep, and it may be too late in a lot of cases. You may already have mold on there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this is something I learned from a contractor, but I didn't, you know, all the doors to, you know, the room that go into rooms and other spaces in an indoor environment. The little gap you see at the bottom of the door is actually kind of partially intentional for ventilation purposes.
Yeah.
Like if that thing, of course, it makes it easy to open and shut.
Yeah.
But if that went all the way flush to the ground,
right,
you know, you don't get air flowing into those rooms very easily. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So, I mean, that's one thing to think about. But I think we've done a pretty good job of covering most of the ventilation issues that you encounter in a home. I wish it was, you know, just like anything with mold, I wish there was kind of a clear cut. A lot of your answers are like, yeah, these are the variables. Kind of look at your own situation and decide what's best.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really, really hard to be an expert on this whole mold subject.
Yeah,
because there are so many variables.
Yeah. But I think, you know, the more education we can have on it,
Yeah.
the more we can make an educated decision for our own homes, or even if you're a mold remediator yourself, you know, as you go into a home, you can look at these things and help homeowners kind of see, okay, it looks like we've got an issue here with ventilation. Let's rectify that, you know, as we figure out the mold situation.
Well, and I always look at this, what is the, I can't remember who said it, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing,
Yeah.
expecting a different result.
Yeah.
You know, if whatever you're doing in your crawl space right now is causing mold, I would change something up. You know, this is clearly not working.
Try something else. Yeah.
Something else.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike, for all your advice on this, and hopefully it was valuable. And we'll look forward to providing another podcast.
We should thank Ari. Ari's our producer.
Our producer?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ari.
Thank you, Ari.
Thanks for all you do there. Appreciate it, Ari.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Till next time.
Thanks for listening to the Mold Matters podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more in-depth information on mold illness and recovery.